Avengers Endgame is the culmination of over a decade of the MCU, and it's one of the most satisfying endings to any movie series that I have ever seen before, and at the same time can be a bit confusing with its ending, but luckily we're here today to break it all down. For today's video, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the ending of Avengers Endgame and explaining various plot points that come together. Again guys, this is the culmination of the entire MCU of 10 years of superhero movies leading to this point. It all kicked off over a decade ago with Iron Man, and now we finally get to see the end of the Infinity Saga. With that said, there are absolutely massive spoilers in this video, so if you have not seen Avengers Endgame yet, please do so before continuing, as we'll not only be spoiling what happens within the movie, but importantly, specifically, the end of the movie. With the spoiler warning out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about exactly what happened. It is finally revealed to us that the reason Doctor Strange gave up the Time Stone at the end of Infinity War was because Tony Stark was the only person capable of figuring out time travel completely. Even with the intellect of Professor Hulk, who we find out is in fact the perfect merchants of Hulk and Bruce Banner, he cannot figure out time travel on his own, and it is only Tony Stark that is capable of this. It's also the perfect combination of Avengers that are willing and able to go back in time using the Quantum Realm and collect all of the Infinity Stones. And it had to be this exact sequence of characters that survived that would be able to use the Quantum Realm to jump back in time. Therefore, why Doctor Strange made it so that Tony Stark and the other Avengers that survived were the ones that did, and the Avengers that were capable of bringing everybody back and ultimately defeating Thanos. After the Avengers split up and collect all 6 of the Infinity Stones, losing Black Widow along the way, they decide that Hulk is ultimately the one that will snap his fingers and bring everyone back. Although Hulk tries, he is ultimately unable to bring back Black Widow, although he does focus on it. The reason for this is the Soul Stone does not work this way, and you cannot bring back the sacrifice once you attain the stone, a rule that we learn in Avengers Endgame. Initially, we see that there are far more birds, and Hawkeye gets a phone call from his wife, telling us right away that the snap actually worked, although Hulk is badly damaged. As we saw in Infinity War and again in Avengers Endgame, if you snap your fingers, it takes a massive toll on your body. That's why when we encountered the early version and main timeline of Thanos earlier in Avengers Endgame, he's a completely different being now. He's utterly and completely disabled after going through 2 snaps, but miraculously still surviving. A testament to Thanos' power, and of course he was beheaded in the main timeline. As per Tony Stark's wishes, we discovered that all of the Avengers and people have been brought back to this timeline 5 years later, meaning that there are now 2 separate groups of people, the ones that went through the snap and the ones that lived through the post-snap and decimation, and have been living on now for 5 years. What they failed to discover though is that the Nebula from 2014, an evil Nebula, managed to swap herself out and steal the Quantum Realm device from the original Nebula team in the Avengers group. And by doing this, following the snap, she is then able to call the Thanos from that timeline before the Guardians of the Galaxy were formed back into the original timeline, as Thanos and his entire army attack and destroy Avengers headquarters. After a massive battle with the core Avengers, several sling ring portals eventually open up, and Doctor Strange, using the power of the sling rings and the other sorcerers, brings all of the surviving Avengers and other armies to Avengers headquarters, all of them to battle Thanos. Before we explain the full ending of Avengers Endgame, I want to kind of explain how time travel works as explained in Endgame. Early on in the movie, Professor Hulk explains that you cannot change the past, even if they use the Quantum Realm and even if they use time travel. Their past will always remain their past. That's why they can't really go back in time and kill Thanos, or prevent the snap from happening. Instead, what ultimately results is the Avengers travel back in time, and every time they remove an Infinity Stone, an alternate timeline is created. However, as the Ancient One reveals, if they do not place the Infinity Stones back into that timeline, something very bad will happen to it, and it will ultimately be destroyed. By collecting the various Infinity Stones, the Avengers aren't really traveling back in time. They're traveling to alternate timelines previously. Thus, in one timeline where Loki is actually able to survive, and another timeline where Thor actually gets to visit with his mom, Frigga. These events didn't actually happen in the past of the main MCU timeline, but because the Avengers traveled back in time, different timelines have been created, meaning that in one timeline, Thanos has been killed before the Guardians of the Galaxy ever form, and Loki manages to escape at the the end of the first Avengers movie, while in the main MCU timeline, this stuff never happened. I hope that makes sense. As again, the Avengers don't actually travel back in time and change their own past. They simply create alternate timelines as a result of the quantum realm. So all of the events of the previous Marvel movies played out exactly how they did before. They weren't actually affected by the events of Avengers Endgame. But back to the final battle. The whole final battle is sort of a big game of keep away, using the Stark Infinity Gauntlet and trying to keep it away from Thanos. Tony Stark eventually asks Doctor Strange what he's supposed to do, but Strange tells him that if he says what he's supposed to do, it won't happen. After several massive battles with several of the Avengers, including Captain Marvel and Scarlet Witch, Thanos does actually attain the Infinity Gauntlet, with Doctor Strange finally looking at Tony and pointing up to the gauntlet, with Iron Man realizing what he has to do. Iron Man then grabs the gauntlet, realizing that he doesn't have to remove the whole thing, only the stones. Using the Mark 85, he's able to secretly pry all 6 of the Infinity Stones away from Thanos. Thanos, though, is utterly unaware and still proceeds to snap his fingers, stating, "I am inevitable." The same words echoed by the Thanos from the main timeline before he's beheaded by Thor. Unfortunately, though, the snap never happens, and it's revealed that using the nanotechnology of the Mark 85, Tony Stark has created a new gauntlet. Although it's very crude, and the Infinity Stones are literally tearing Tony Stark's body apart as we look at him, with the pure energy surging through him, and the only thing keeping him alive is his arc reactor. Tony then says, "I am Iron Man," and snaps his fingers. But this time, this snap is not to bring anybody back. It's to destroy Thanos and his entire army. We also see that using his massive will, Thanos is able to survive the snap for a time, until ultimately realizing he is defeated by the Avengers, specifically though, a mortal in Tony Stark. And the snap eventually consumes him and he fades away, with the Avengers bringing everybody back and destroying Thanos. However, to snap his fingers is simply too much for Tony Stark, and it's only after Pepper Potts tells him that everyone is safe that he allows to let himself rest. And the end of an era in the MCU comes to a close with the death of Iron Man. I cannot overstate that this is one of the most beautiful and tragic moments in all of cinematic history. The fact that it's only once Tony Stark hears that everyone is safe that he finally allows himself to rest. The greatest Avenger comes to an end, and the MCU will never be the same. Following this, all of the superheroes culminate for a funeral for Tony Stark, with Tony Stark's original arc reactor, proof that Tony Stark has a heart, set off on the lake by his wife Pepper Potts. Something very important that we learn here is that all of the Avengers that died post-snap still remain dead, with a new timeline of Gamora actually being sent to this timeline along with Thanos' army, as even the past Gamora betrays her father. Still though, the original timeline Gamora remains dead, along with other characters like Vision and Loki. Although Loki survived in another timeline, the main MCU timeline's Loki did in fact die in Infinity War. Same with characters like Heimdall. We are getting a Vision Scarlet Witch TV series though, which could indicate that Vision returns in some fashion. How though, we're not sure. As of this point of the MCU though, Vision is still currently dead, which is one of the major reasons why Scarlet Witch attacks Thanos so effectively, and really portrays her true power. After Avengers Compound is destroyed by the Tony Stark house, Professor Hulk has created sort of a makeshift lab, with brand new Pym particles being supplied to them, as Captain America, with Thor's hammer I may add, is selected to travel back in time. Travel back in time and place the Infinity Stones back in the timelines where they were stolen from. As Professor Hulk says, just like earlier in the movie, they will only experience 5 seconds, while Captain America will take as much time as he needs. Earlier in the film though, Captain America actually gets to see Peggy Carter once more, when he's attempting to steal the Pym particles and the Tesseract. It's here that Captain America actually realizes that he can again have a life with Peggy Carter once the universe is saved and Thanos is stopped. And it appears in this scene as if Bucky already knows this, with Falcon not really being aware. Again, another completely beautiful moment in the MCU, the fact that Cap actually realizes he can be happy. I also want to point out that as Captain America takes the Infinity Stones back to the new timelines that have been created, this is the end of the Infinity Stones in the current timeline and space of the MCU, meaning that after Captain America does this, the Infinity Stones are no longer a part of the main timeline, as they were destroyed by Thanos and then returned to their own respective timelines. Again, finally marking the end of the Infinity Saga in the MCU. It's then revealed though that Captain America misses the point in time where he's supposed to return back to the main Avengers timeline, with Bucky being the only one really knowing what Cap decided to do at this moment. that he decided to stay back in time and live a full life with Peggy Carter. It's then revealed that a much older Steve Rogers has actually been present here for some time. We see Falcon approach him as he's overlooking a lake, as it's revealed that Steve Rogers did in fact get married and live out a full happy life, the one thing that the character always wanted. Unlike the character of Tony Stark, Steve Rogers is capable of stopping and resting, with the two of them, I may add, getting completely appropriate endings to their stories. Falcon mentions to Steve that he doesn't want to live in a world without Captain America, to which Steve says that he won't have to. The older Steve Rogers from this timeline then grants Falcon a brand new undamaged shield, as earlier in the movie, Thanos actually broke the Captain America shield in half, as Falcon now receives the mantle of Captain America. There are several big questions here though, is how did this Captain America form an alternate timeline but is now back in the main timeline with the Avengers? As other people have stated, I believe that two timelines were formed here, but they were very similar, and ultimately the two of them, because they were so similar, converged once again, and the older Steve Rogers was allowed to connect with the main timeline, and the two timelines became one once again. So to ask this question, was an older Steve Rogers around all of this time? In my opinion, I don't think so. Again, because the past is always the past, and the past cannot be affected. New timelines can simply be created. But again, I believe that these two timelines were so similar that they simply converged into one after Steve Rogers went back in time. However, this is never explicitly stated in the movie. It's just a hypothesis on my part. We then venture to Thor back in New Asgard, as he reveals he's going to join the Guardians of the Galaxy with Star-Lord as his leader, at least for the time being. After Endgame though, the effects of the snap will always be around, as there's now two separate groups of people. Half of the population did still live out the past 5 years, while with everyone that was snapped, they were simply brought back without any memory of the last 5 years at all, as for them, it was only a few seconds. It'll be really interesting to see what happens moving forward in the MCU. But that was my ending explained for Avengers Endgame, and I hope, for those of you that were confused, I did an okay job on explaining exactly what happened. We will be doing several videos on Avengers Endgame explaining smaller details as time goes on, and also providing you guys with updates on the MCU moving forward, as now it's a very different place. Again though, we are giving away several Infinity War Hot Toys figures. If you would like to enter that giveaway, all you have to do is like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me below which Infinity Stone you think is the most powerful. Again, also don't forget to pick up some Avengers merch now that you guys have seen the movie. Thank you guys as always so much for watching, hit that subscribe button to join our team, and have a great day.